Well, my name is Paul Anthony Klasen Jr., born the 27th of February, 1927, in St. Anthony's Hospital in Wenatchee. I came to Soap Lake about 6 days later. My folks were residing in Soap Lake, and rather interesting is that my dad and his brother were involved in the transfer business, and my dad had only trucks. And my mom, my brother, Frank, was born here in Ephrata, and she's a midwife. And my dad wanted to get a car, and so Earl McKay Hospital, was a good friend of the family, and he loaned Dad his car to take Mom and me down to the hospital in Wenatchee. And they were very kind of Earl, but Dad and Earl were good friends, and that's how I got started in Soap Lake. And I lived in Soap Lake for all practical purposes until 1955 or 54, I moved to Ephrata. And so, it was 56?
That's born May 56.
Well, that's when I moved to Ephrata. I had to be near the courthouse. I was elected prosecutor, so I had to be closer to the courthouse.
Okay, let me ask you a question on that, Paul. This picture of you with your shingle is pass that actually over to him. I want to see if where that was taken.
This was taken in Soap Lake. That is part of where Richard Bontius lived, right on the top of the hill across from the community church, Evangelical Church, the building there, and the fire department, where the garage is. This was the fire truck was parked right next to it. And that's where I had opened my first legal office in 1952.
Pass
Or
that
51.
Oh, sorry. Paul, say that again. Just say that whole sentence.
Well, that's where I opened my legal office in, I think, June or May of 1951.
Okay, I just have a question. I know everybody might have questions. I just want to ask you on your law practice. I didn't realize until today when I was looking at photos that Jane gave me that you had a law practice in Soap Lake.
I did, not for very long. I was appointed a deputy prosecutor effective October 1st, 1951. So I had the office maybe 4 months or so.
And is that when you were the city attorney then?
Well, I ran for city attorney shortly thereafter. I don't remember exactly when, but the office of the city attorney was elective at that time, and I ran for the office and was elected. And I was city attorney until I got canned sometime in the late 50s for enforcing the gambling laws at the Soap Lake Businessmen's Club. Well, what happened, was that they were operating a regular Reno joint down there. They had silver dollars and chips, and I never went into the place. I stayed away from it, but one of my deputies went in there and the sheriff, and they complained about it, and the sheriff raided it, and we prosecuted them, and the main manager at that time was a fellow by the name of Larry Casciotti, and he was a friend of mine, but he was a wheeler dealer and auto repairman but he was the operator, and it was just, they were thumbing their nose at any kind of discretion at all, and the mayor complained to me about it, and so eventually they did something, and then the day Casciotti was sentenced, I got canned by the mayor. So I cared less.
It's ironic because my other grandfather bought one of the slot machines from Marina a couple of weeks ago, the old antique ones.
from the back in
It
the
had to
day.
be. It had to be. Yeah, it was from the old Businessmen's Club. No.
Well, they had the slot machines. That wasn't so much. They had the slot machines, and they were legal, so to speak, at the time. But he had crap table, a big crap table, the whole layout there, and they were playing craps and 21, and it was a regular gambling joint, and I was a good friend of the mayor or the city attorney, and I just sort of shrugged it off. I didn't want to get involved in it, and people were really teed off afterwards. Some of my friends were, but my hands are tied. Friends or no friends, you had the law was the law, and if somebody got arrested, what excuse would I have to say they couldn't prosecute?
So, this is a good little segue for that story about your mom on the phone and the gambling that would go on down at the.
Oh, well.
The Soap Lake had a lot of gambling apparently.
Well, they had at the Pastime. The Pastime had a going pinochle game, and it was just among friends. I think it was just maybe one or two going, and no big time gambling. But every now and then they get a big poker game going, and the stakes at that time would be you'd buy in for. Well, this is the 30s, buy them for $5 or $10. The banker would come over, or the banker, I know many times Jack Radke's dad, Radke would be the banker, and they would play fairly good stakes. And somebody complained to some lady, and she called the sheriff. Well, my folks ran the telephone company and called the sheriff, and as usual knew it was coming along, and so the lady complained to the sheriff to ask him to come out and shut that game down. And of course, as soon as she hung up, my mom called down and said, "Willard!" Now, Willard Gillis was still the operator. Freddie Forsyth owned it, but he said, "Willard, shut her down, the sheriff's a coming." And that was the way things operated in those days. But at any rate, they would have 5 or 6 guys play in the poker game, and for some reason I could get in there anytime. Of course, I couldn't buy drinks or anything, but they didn't seem. I was a good friend of the family, and I'd be in there, watch the men play pinochle. And my dad played pinochle down there a lot. He liked it. I think he'd play 25 cents a set or something. It was a friendly game. But the poker games would get a little bit serious.
You said that your dad and uncle ran the Soap Lake Transfer Company?
Yes, sir.
Roughly what period of time and whereabouts did they operate from?
Well, a little bit of history. My dad was raised in northern Michigan near the Wisconsin line. And my Uncle Frank and a guy by the name of Bill Euler went up to Nome, Alaska in the gold rush in 1903. Well, my uncle made a little money, not much, and Bill Euler, he drove the, what do they call the joy wagon, to pick up all the refuge. And so after several years, they came back down, and my Uncle Frank went to Spokane and bought a half interest in a grocery store on 2nd and Bernard. And my dad came out in 1913 to see him and to live with him. And my dad drove the delivery wagon, the horses, and he didn't like the setup, and so he left in 1914. And 1950, my uncle got the consumption. That was what they called TB in those days. And he came down to Soap Lake in 1915 for health reasons. The Soap Lake still had he came down there, and it was first he got the mail contract to haul the mail from Grand Orchard to Soap Lake Station to Soap Lake. And then they started a dray business. And when my father was discharged from the Navy in November of 1918, he went to work for underwriters and for about 9 months, and he came out to visit his brother in Soap Lake in 1919. He hated the train ride, never went back. And so he went into business with his brother, and they had several trucks, and they would meet the train, and they had Soap Lake storage would be behind Across the street from the Shell station is now, across to the east, in the back, about halfway next to the cliff in there, they had the storage, and that was their office there. And my first house, when my dad built the house on the corner, a kitty corner from John's Market. And the nice house, it's sort of a junkyard now, some relation to Marina, but my dad built that house, and that's where my folks lived there for quite a while. And but that's where the transfer station was, right 100 feet from the house.
Now, is that where you live, where they had the little cabins that they rented out?
No, they had the cabins. My dad was in the transfer business. My mom felt he was working too hard, and there was a guy by the name of Sorrell that he was running the same type of business, and they kept lowering the rates. And my mom thought that Dad was going to wear himself out, so she convinced Dad to find a business someplace else. And my dad was good in figures. He was a storekeeper in the Navy, and so he bought a store down in a place called Turner, Washington, and that's about 15 miles from Dayton, the Walla Walla area down there. And it was a general place. They had gas station and the post of the whole thing, a general store. He got down there, and lo and behold, the trade was all with the farmers, and the farmers all wanted credit, and which was fine, except that if the crop didn't come in, you didn't get paid, and Dad didn't have the money to finance it. He was there about 9 months, 8 months, and just walked off and left it. Just walked off. And then he came back to Soap Lake and bought out Sorrell and bought the telephone company.
Oh, that's something.
And the telephone company, we call the Soap Lake Telephone Exchange, was up top of the hill, sort of kitty corner from the library. And that's where I grew up for the most part. That's from 1929 or so. I lived there until I moved to Ephrata.
So they had cabins that they rented out
Well,
beside
then,
that?
there was there were four cabins, and we called one was a sort of utility for the place, but there were 3 cabins, a boardwalk, a board porch, and Mom rented them out during the summertime. I think $10 or $15 a week. There was no plumbing. There was plumbing outside. There was a common John outside, and you had to go outside for the water to get your water. And I think there was just a large one room, a little bit of a kitchen and a bed, and it was $10 or $15 a week. And she rented those out during the summertime. And there was a demand, and she finally sold them, though, to Ed Enos, and they were moved up to the west end of town, and she sold them for $150. That's what she.
What year would that be in?
Well, that would have been about I suppose she sold 38 or so, or 39. She sold the cabins.
20s through the 30s.
Yeah, in the 30s.
Summer trade.
Yeah, that's just a summer trade, and she furnished linens, and that was about the place they were furnished. But she always got so disgusted with some of the people that would go down to the beach in the summertime and plaster themselves with olive oil. They didn't have suntan lotion, so to speak, and they get the sheets all, and she furnished sheets every week with them, and that really got on to her. She didn't appreciate that. And some of the people, I won't mention nationalities, but some of the people used more olive oil than others, put it that way. But it was a friendly, everybody were friends, and they'd stay there for a week or two. Some of them stayed for months. And in the evenings, there was a lot of socializing going on the front porch.
Is that where you learned the long division?
That's what, for entertainment, we would played a lot of checkers. Checkers was a common game, and and we'd do math. And this one fellow taught me math, taught me long division. And as a consequence, I think we had long division in grade school in the 3rd or 4th grades, and I went back to school and I knew all my long division and stuff, and I passed up the 3rd grade. Because of my just having fun during the summertime, but that was just something to amuse, among other things, keeping out of trouble. Not too much, but keeping out of some trouble. I took my turn in the afternoon at the switchboard at the telephone company. I knew how to operate the switchboard, and the kids, we'd play around. We'd go in the afternoon. A lot of times we'd go down to the beach, go swimming. And that was go down to the beach and play games. Going games at that time were hide and seek, Mother May I, or Tick the Can. I don't know if you remember those, and that type of thing. And sometimes go fishing up the Blue Lake, Park Lake. And when we go fishing up at that time, before the road was put in 1934, I believe, Dad was a pretty good fisherman, and we would go up the Pinner Ridge Road to Cooley City and come back down into Dry Falls and Park Lake. But that's how you would get up there. There was no road. Oh, there was a road, but not a real passable road. So we go up the Pinner Ridge, up to Cooley City, and come around the loop. And that's how Dad would go fishing up there. And, go up the dump and see what was going on at the dump. Go up to Flint Hill. If you know, there was a place on the west side of Soap Lake. It would be, I would suppose, a quarter of a mile from the high school on that road up that little draw. And there were a lot of the Indians would sit up there and make arrowheads. Now, they brought the flint in, and there was no flint around, but there were a lot of chips up there, and you could, if you're lucky, I think I found part of an arrowhead, but a lot of people, they ruined the place. Actually, they got there doing so much digging, and I doubt there's a piece of flint up there anymore, but you go up to Flint Hill and fool around and maybe ride your bike around the lake.
Who were your buddies that you ran around with?
Pardon?
Who were your buddies that you ran around with?
Well, George Walthall, he was a classmate. Paul Hampton. Now, the Hamptons owned the store and sold out to Lanigan's. And they had a little cabin court over on the west side, about the 4th Street up. And then there was Leo Hanley. His folks ran the Skookum. His mother ran the Skookum. She was a health nut. She was really strong on water purges, enemas. Man, she'd give out the washout down there. That was her. But she was a health nut, and she ran a place there. And then George, and there was Lund boy, from Lund Beach. Now that's the beach north of Soap Lake. I don't know what they call it now.
Last Breezes.
Yeah, that was
Well,
we used to
it's
call it
Korean now.
Lund's Beach, and Art Lund and his brother, and there were a lot of kids around. My next door neighbor, Stanley Haywood, they ran the bakery, and then there was the Bonthiuses. Now Joy still lives in Soap Lake. Her name is Pinkerton now, but Butch ran the butcher shop that where I had my law office, first in the early 30s, and then he had his daughter Jean had a beauty salon in Roxy Thorson's place down on the hill there, on the east side, and then Joyce helped out at the butcher shop, which moved down to where the Red Dell Tavern is right now. That was Case had the butcher shop there, and that turned into a drugstore. Charlie Malin made it a drugstore, and then Walt Goodman took it over from Malin. And I can tell you a funny story about that. Everybody generally had dogs. We had a dog. We must have had 3 or 4, not at the same time, but after my folks sold the telephone company, he bought the big building up on the highway. It was built by Adam, kind of a guy named Adam, and it had some apartments, a grocery store, and a Richfield gas station. And my dad still had the contract to haul the mail back and forth. And we had this dog, and he just hated any other dog. I don't know why, but he was friendly with kids and just a real pet, but he couldn't stand the sight of another dog. Well, Dad took him up to coming back from the train depot and driving slow through Soap Lake, and the window was down, and Pat saw a dog on the main street right across from Notaris's Don's restaurant. And damn, Pat jumped out and chased this dog, and the dog ran into the drugstore, and Pat went into the drugstore after him. And Dad said, I just kept going, and was that your dog? I don't know whose dog that was. I don't know but there must have been a real commotion in that drugstore when Pat and that dog met, because Pat met an untimely death. He was killed, was fed strychnine by a cousin of Zane Grey, the author of the Western. He lived in Soap Lake at the time, and he was receiving a pension from the Zane Grey estates, and he had a dog, and he had a sort of a police dog when Pat tore the hell out of him. And so he was so mad at Pat that he fed him some strychnine. I don't know if that's because I was a lawyer or not, but I had an affinity for snakes. And I wouldn't say I had pet snakes, but I was never afraid of them. And I would catch a bull snake every now and then and carry it around. And one day, or one evening, this would have been in the 30s, I had this bull snake, and the telephone company was about a half a block from the Sunset Theater. It was right down there next to the Agronoff, tore down now. And I went down there, and I had this snake, and I walked the sidewalk, and I made like I was going to buy a ticket. And nobody they were afraid to go into the theater because they were afraid I'd go in with that damn snake. And John Lee was running the theater, the Lee Theater here, and he came out, and we had an argument over the snake. And I said, John, this is a public sidewalk. I'm not harming anybody. The snake isn't harming anybody. I have every right to be here, and I'm going to stay here. And we got a standstill. I refused to give in to him. So he immediately hightailed it up to the telephone and saw my mother, and the next thing I knew, Junior, come home. And I lost the argument. That was the end of that. But boy, John Lee, he really, he was a friend, but I stood my grounds, and that was
Speaking of the phone company, how long did the operators actually operate?
Well, we stayed open. Dad would take the shift. I think he would open up at either 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. And Mom would keep it open until 11 or 12 o'clock. After that, it cost you 25 cents to make a call. We were closed down. We had, the first switchboard that I can remember we had was a crank magneto. And just like you see you put the plugs in and the jacks would fall down. You had a double set of cords, receiving and sending. And we had, I think, about we had 30 lines, and 2 of them were long distance lines. All the long distance calls were routed through Wilbur, and I don't understand that. But if you called Spokane or Seattle or any place, so they were routed through Wilbur. That was our central agency. And I think the folks charged $3 a month for a single line. There were not too many, but the businesses, the beach hotel, the hotels, and would have a business, and then the residential, I think, were $1.50, and they were limited to 3 people on a line. You know, long and a short, you'd bring in, and so we had, and at the first, all those were pair lines that look comparable to, you go out along the railroad lines, you'd see all those, well, Dad had lines strung all over the place, and in about 36, he put in a cable. They took them all down, and they put in a cable in which you had, I think, about 40 pairs. But we had the long distance, and the folks had to take all the AT&T calls in free, but we got 30% of the toll charges on outgoing calls. And of course, Bell Telephone, when Dad would get the bill, they had to be paid, and it was up to Dad to collect. And Mom would segregate the tickets. Every time a telephone call was made, the operator at Wilbur would make out a ticket, and they would punch it as to the time. There was a 3-minute was a standard rate. Anything over 3 minutes, you had to pay a surcharge, and they'd stamp it. And at the end of the month, the telephone company would send us a pack of these tickets, and they would show the number where the call was originated, and Mom would separate them out and make out the bills, and then the folks would have to divvy up and hope to collect the toll charges. Well, in the summertime, they did a pretty good business because they would come to the telephone office, and we had 2 booths that you connect up, and they would make calls a lot of times to Seattle, and they would wait. Sometimes they have to wait a while before the connections would go through, or lines busy or the like, because there was only 2 lines, and one of them was shared with Ephrata. I don't know how many freight I had, but one of the lines was shared with Ephrata to Wilbur, and people would gather around, and then, of course, and Mom would put the call through. It would be asked for time and charges, and as soon as the call was hung up, the operator would say what the charges were, how long they talked. And then, of course, that was a cash transaction. And that was quite the deal in the evening when the rates would change after 7 o'clock. So from 7 o'clock till, say, 10 o'clock, the people would come in and make their long-distance calls from around town, rather than some of them would make them from the hotel or the like, and then we'd have to do the same thing and get the time and charges. But then on Sunday we were generally closed. But an emergency opened up, and we had the switch for the fire alarm. So if you want to make a fire report, it was on the outside of the front door. You call into Central and go out there and start flipping the switch, turning the fire siren on, and call the fire department.
Hey, Paul, where was the Lakeview Sanitarium? And here's a picture of it. I'll just pass it around, but do you remember that one?
Oh, sure.
So,
Well, no, I don't. No, I don't, because it burned down. The Lakeview was owned by George Crow, and it was next to Lanigan's Market, the foundation, next to Linden. And it was quite an establishment, and it had a view right down on the beach, right there in the corner there, and there was nothing down. That was really sort of strange that beach was owned by a guy by the name of Miller, and the city had a hard time. There was nothing built there, but it was free, but the city, there wasn't a public park. The public used it, but eventually the city bought, I think 100, when I was city attorney, we bought it for back $100 150 feet from the shoreline back, and that's the public park, and they had to pay old P.E. Miller $10,000 for it, which was a godly sum in the 30s. And but this is the Soap Lake Sanitarium, and it was quite an operation. No, Linda, remember those foundations? There was a big foundation at a swimming. Well, they didn't have. I don't know if they had a swimming pool, but the McDonald building, right next to Lanigan's store, had a swimming pool in it.
This is I'll pass this around, this is the McDonald building, I'm pretty sure it is. So Paul, I want to understand more where that Lakeview was. You know what's there now?
It's all flat. It's all been filled. The foundation's all been filled in, I believe. It was right across the street from Linda's residence. It would be on, what's the street that, the Main and First.
Fur.
It used to be First, it used to be First.
Yeah.
Now it's Ash, now it's Ash.
Now this, the McDonald building, they had the post office was there at one time, and I guess barber shop and whatnot. And they had a dance floor upstairs, and they had the swimming pool. I don't know all that, but they had a good sized swimming pool in there. And it was right next to, this would be Main and Division, right next to that air conditioning place, isn't that the,
That was the old
Yeah.
John's, which
Yeah.
was
Lanigan's Mark.
and it, I don't remember because it was burned down before I had it, but I know my uncle said they had dances there, and he fought the fire like the devil because he liked to go to dances, but it was one fire and that was it.
So McDonald's was, okay, there's a map right here. It's an older map. I'm sorry if I'm in your picture.
Well, here,
No,
see
no,
here?
that's okay.
This is Division, and this is Main. So,
Well, McDonald's would be right there, that little
Right
right there,
there in
and the
that
Lakeview
little-
was right there.
and it was right behind it.
The Lakeview was beyond the alley, right across the alley from it. That was the McDonald building, and this would be the Lakeview
Yeah,
Sanitarium.
okay,
And
so,
across the street is the utility building, which is one of the oldest original buildings in Soap Lake. It's a little square. Yeah,
the ones Phil Wick,
Yeah.
Phil Wick owns that, Phil and Marty Wick own that.
And tell me about that building, Paul,
we call it the utility building
because
because the utility company ran it and they had their office there at one
the
time.
electric,
The Fowlers that they had, before it was sold to the PUD. Well, those were the Sorrell cabins right across the street from the on Division. There's a house in there, and the Krigbaum lived there, and the Sorrell apartments, and they were there as long as I know, so they must have been built in the 20s. And the Krigbaums had the newsstand and down where the liquor store is now.
Yeah,
And that was a newsstand. It was one time a bowling alley, duck pins. I set pins there, but there was a bowling alley, a newsstand, and run by the Krigbaums and a fellow by the name of, well, the name escapes me, but they had about 6 lanes, and I set pins in there. There was really sort of a dangerous job because some of the guys, those duck pins were rather small, and they'd come down there and the pins would be flying everywhere, you know.
so the Sorrell cabins, were they directly across from my folks'
Yes,
store?
yes.
Which now they're no longer there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
okay, but behind that, like on what would have been First, or what's Ash now, that, according to this map that was done by Kip Gimple and them,
Mm-hmm.
there's 3 blocks from Division. It's Ash, Birch, and Cherry, and this supposedly alley that's behind Cherry, between Cherry and the next street, that was all considered cottage city
Yeah.
because they were all a whole bunch of cottages in there.
Well, it's interesting how Soap Lake got started. It was all, that land was all owned by the railroad company when they got the land grants. And the original town of Soap Lake, on the plat maps is up about the last street up on the side of the hill.
The West Hill?
The West Hill, that's the original town site. Nothing was ever built up there, but that's where the plat, there's a platted Soap Lake. And then the first part was Siloam. It was called, the town was Siloam, and then from Division west was called Cottage City. And then it was all united at one time when they finally incorporated it as Soap Lake. But the original town side of Soap Lake is up on the hill overlooking Soap Lake on the west side.
Very far west side by the Boy Scout camp.
Yeah.
That's where,
Where the log cabin is down there, the log house is a nice log house. Well, that's the general location of the Soap Lake Sanitarium.
And then behind that was the original plat.
Yes, far back, yes.
back up against the hill towards where
It's
that,
on the side of the hill there, looking down behind the nudist camp in that area, between, well, be 3rd and Main, up back on the side of the hill.
okay, you know where Sam Israel has that chain across the road?
Yeah, that's going to the nudist camp.
Right, is there part of the first town past that chain?
Yeah, past that chain, just past that rock formation in there, a little bit to the south, but that's
So they laid it out above
yes.
the current lake, what would have been the
View, very good view lots in there. I mean, really, that's where the, but that's
So it went from there back toward the sewage plant.
yes.
And is that where the Indians made their camp?
Yes, in that area. Well, they were down there next to the lake where the news camp was. They put their tents right there, right next to the lake.
Where the natural spring is?
Yeah.
In town, I have this one of the Spalding Garage looking pretty much west, and talk about like the different, there was like a number of gas stations in town.
Well, you'd start there at on the east end was the Spalding Garage, and he had the old pump handle. And then down the street, the next one would have been Radke service station, where the old Del Red used to be before it moved across the street. And then when he closed out, he moved the Shell station up to that vacant parking lot just past the Maskers Theater. That was the Shell station. Across the street from the other. Then there, up the street, a guy by the name of Nelson put in a service station right on the corner where Gimples had the beauty, there's a beauty parlor there. So, well, that was Nelson's standard station. Those are the first early ones. And then where the Shell station was the Union 76 station, where the Shell is now. Up the street, Joe, what's his name, had a Texaco station. Joe,
Herman.
yeah. And then there was another station further, it's a huge car lot now. There was a service station there, but those came in right after World War II.
Was that the 66, Phillips 66?
Yes, and then around the corner, Bing Ran had a Phillips 66, and you turned to go up to Spokane.
Okay.
The road, there was a,
Grandpa worked at the 66
Yeah.
station.
that was a Phillips 66 station.
Now, was there 2 gas stations where Bev Hasper lives?
Oh,
That was,
do you know where Bev Hasper lives, Paul?
No, yes, well, that was the Phillips 66 station in there. And that was owned one by Bing Ram. He put that in there.
Okay, thank you. Talk about, I'm gonna pass these pictures around, I wanna understand, let me ask you first, is the Dewdrop Inn and Carl's Cozy Kitchen the same place?
No,
Oh, okay,
the Dewdrop Inn, now I told you about my Uncle Frank being up with Bill Euler. Well, Bill Euler came down and he opened the Dewdrop Inn. And that is the is shown right here in the picture. Right, this is the Dewdrop Inn, right here, and then he sold it out to somebody, and Delancey bought it and owned it for a number of years. Yeah, and that's this two-story here. No, this is the Anderson building. The Dewdrop Inn was right behind it.
Oh, okay.
I think this is the Anderson building, and the street ran.
Is that Walthall's?
Yeah, that's the wall. And the street ran right through. Here's the Dewdrop Inn right there with the, and this was the Anderson. He had apartments and whatnot.
Would you guys stay there like that?
There's the cozy.
Okay, so this is on the other side of that.
No, now this is Carl's Cozy Kitchen.
Oh,
And that's down, Carl's Cozy Kitchen would be in the general direction of Marita's, the Don's Restaurant, the next building up. It sat back a little bit, but that's where see, Marina's would be right here, and this is the Notaris Lodge would be in this area. And this is the Carl's Cozy Kitchen, Carl Kason had it. And before that, it was run by Lucas's partner, what the heck? Anyway, and they took over the operation of the Beach Hotel. And Kason moved in,
so
and
the
then,
Cozy Kitchen is where Jumbo's, not James, Jumbo's. The Red Dale was.
yeah,
in
Red
there,
Dell, and then
And then, because Don's is.
going east.
Well, eventually, wasn't that either dry cleaner, Joe Green?
Yes, the Joe Green and the appliances in that area.
The
Okay, that's,
bakery and two partners had an electronic shop in there too.
okay, so that's Don's banquet room now.
Well, either that or 50 feet east in that area. And there's between that and the Oasis. The Oasis would be right in here. And back, and Carl built a little dance hall. There was a little bit of grass back, and it sat back about 25 feet, and there was a little dance hall he had in there. And everybody had the taverns, like James Cafe in the back. They had a dance place, and I knew the people that played the drums and the piano. Bob White Cafe in the back had the dance. They entertained the people during the summertime. I mean, they go down there and drink the beer, and all they could sell was beer, but they drink and dance, and the music would generally be a piano and drums.
Here's a great shot to go along with that. Dewdrop Inn Groceries, Wood. I'm wondering if that's the gentleman you were referring to.
Bill, you were?
Yeah,
You were?
yeah.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't recognize. I knew Bill. He was a good friend of the family, and he was quite a character. After he sold out to Delancey, he toured around the area on the route and selling pots and pans. And he buddied up with a guy named Vic Birkeland, who had Birkeland's where Giesey's. Giesey's bought out Birkeland's, and Birkeland sold clothes overhauls and whatnot. And then they branched out. Birkeland bought the store, and I don't know exactly what happened to Bill. He was a salesman, and he traveled around selling, but he sold pots and pans out around the area.
See here,
I don't know.
Looks like it goes in.
I
here.
don't know where this is, but I know this is where going up the hill, and the Lakeside Hotel was right here, and the bakery, Munsky's Bakery, Haywood's Bakery, was a little further east. And Mrs. Barnum, she had it opened the USO there.
Okay, so that building.
It's still standing.
Okay, it's the building.
And that was then at one time, it was the first office of the Grant County Public Utilities District.
Yeah, I've
Well,
heard that story.
And the PUD took over the Fowler Soaply Utilities Company, I think in 1944 or something, because I was the first lineman grunt for the grunt, that's the helper for the lineman, for the Grant County PUD. And I worked there for him for about a month before I was drafted into the military. But I can tell you an interesting story if you're interested. There was only 2 linemen, Marion Sally and Keith Mangold.
Sorry, sorry, would you repeat that?
Marion Sally and Keith Mangold, and Bill Long was the manager, and that was the office was there. And we went up to Cooley City to set a pole. And Cooley City, is built on practically a pile of rocks. There's very few basements, if any, in Cooley City. And they had got the hole dug, but they had to blast to make it a little deeper. And we got up there, and I don't know who the powder man was, but he set the charges. And we had a thick rubber mat, must have been about 12 by 12 to put over the hole. And I stacked used tires on top of it. The idea was to make the blast go down in the hole. Well, everyone fire in the hole, and shot it off, and the hole acted as a cannon barrel, and those tires went up maybe 400 or 500 feet, and they circled like donuts. It was the lazy donuts, and they come down, and 1 or 2 of them hit on a house across the street, but they lit flat. And the first thing you know, a lady shot out. She was scared. She shot out of there and wanted to know what had happened. And when they told her what happened, boy, did she give the PUD hell. Well, it scared the poor woman. I mean, they didn't give any warning. Nobody expected this to happen, but those tires just did lazy like donuts up there, and they come down and hit, and 1 or 2 of them hit on the roof of her house, and boy, she shot out of that house like wherever she dropped, happened. And I never went back myself. I stayed down.
Well, now, Dad, when you had the telephone company, part of that growing up, when your folks had the telephone company, you had to place the poles and stuff.
Oh yeah,
like
but
that.
we didn't
So you
have
didn't
we
do any
did
blasting when
we
you
didn't do any blasting. They were able to.
Good thing.
Dad would set the poles, but we'd dig them, and we had a truck, and then he'd put a big steel plate behind it, and we'd back it up. My brother and I had poles. We'd guide it, and he'd back it up, and the pole would drop in the hole. And we didn't have to do it too many times, but we had a stack of poles, about a dozen in our backyard, to use when necessary.
How old were you when you worked for PUD as a grunt?
Pardon?
How old were you when you worked for PUD?
18 years old.
18
I was just before I was drafted. And the other thing was Sam Israel. Now, Sam was a good friend of mine, but Sam was a real estate magnate, but he was a bad man to do business with. And he bought up a lot of property in Soap Lake, but he would never improve anything. And he said, well, he got stuck over in Seattle. No, he owned a big share of the Pioneer District, and he got stuck on some liens, and if you wanted to make improvements, fine, but you had to pay for them, he wouldn't pay for them. And as a consequence, he had so much property tied up in Soap Lake and he would never improve any of his property. He'd buy like mad, but after he bought it, he could rent it if you could use it, and he would sell, and his selling price was 8% plus a year interest plus what he paid for it. And of course, after years, it really mounted up. And he refused to sell it. And Sam was a real good friend of mine, and we ran into a lot of disputes, and he bought, they had LIDs put in, especially in the West End, of a local improvement district that put in the streets and the sewer, and some of those LIDs would be defaulted, and Sam would buy them up, but never do anything with them. And so he, in a sense, was not good for Soap Lake. He, and he lived up there, and he would say, well, He had several guys who would want to buy some of his land and put on a thing, but he would never. He would get such a price for it, and he had his orders, and he was a funny guy in a sense, a real businessman. He made his money. He was a shoemaker, shoe repairman, and he made his money during World War II repairing all the shoes from Fort Lewis. That's where, and then he immediately invested. He and his brother, and he invested in the real estate, and it was down in the 40s in Seattle, and that's where he got his money. And
You know how he ended up in Soap Lake?
well, I really don't. No, he bought that property up there on Westmont Acres, and he tried to raise some cattle, and that he was not that type of a businessman. He didn't, and gosh, I don't know what brought him up there. He didn't like the nudist colony down there. He did down below him. He didn't like that at all, and he was against it. And you go out there, and he lived rather. Lived frugally, although he liked to big game hunt, and he had several Boone and Crockett records for big game up in Canada and Alaska. But he got in the sleeping bag. He got sick. He caught some sort of a bug, and he just quit, just like that. And he never married. He was born on the island of Rhodes. I've been to where he was born, and he was part of the Jewish that came out of Greece, out of Turkey, and they were really prosecuted, and he had to leave. His family had to leave and came to the United States. But he was a fairly generous man. He, in a sense, my mother would ding him for charitable purposes, and he'd contribute. He said he'd put us on the list, and his company made charitable donations at the end of the year, and he'd put it on the list. And my brother was mentally handicapped in a Lakeland Village, and Mom would hit him up for a couple $100 for a Christmas party, and he'd throw it in. But and you go up there, and he had dogs, and he'd meet you at the door with a gun. He was very paranoid. And he got mad at me because I wouldn't make the sheriff give him a direct phone line from his house to the courthouse. Well, I had no authority to that, but he thought that I could make the sheriff, and he'd walk through the courthouse, and we'd chat, and he would show me his income tax returns. God, I mean, how much taxes he paid. I enjoyed talking to the fellow, and he was a friend, but he could bend your ear and never quit.
We got 3 minutes left, so.
Well, you haven't asked me about the whorehouses.
Oh.
Tell us about the whorehouse.
Tell us about the whorehouses, and then you keep talking, it might take that.
Okay, you're coming off. Well, in Soap Lake, we had two whorehouses. One was run by a fellow that had some apartments right behind where the kitty corner from Marinas, that little square there, up there on the side of the hill. That was George Colson. Now, George Colson there were some apartments there, and there were about 3 or 4, and that's where he operated out of. And up behind, he had a corral where he had some horses. He was a drugstore cowboy type. And George had, I can remember as a kid, he drove around in the last car that I knew, he had a 40 blue Cadillac convertible. And his girls, they never associated in public. He kept them sequestered. And the only time I ever saw him was riding around with him in his convertible or riding horses with him. And but they were very discreet. And the other place was at the basement of the Oasis, run by a man by the name of Jones from Wenatchee. And he wasn't the operator that George Colson was. And poor George, he moved out when things got out, and he moved down to Yakima, and I think the feds busted him on a drug charge. And he's down there in Yakima, and that's where he finally got out and lived out his age. But he was a smooth operator. I know he'd come up to the telephone company at times and make long distance calls for some reason rather than from his phone, and I don't know why. And sometimes I'd be playing solitaire there, and he taught me a number of card tricks. And my mother would just beside herself. She didn't want me to have anything to do with that man. You know, I mean, she wouldn't tell me why, and I could understand why, but I would have nothing. But he was a very engaging personality, and I think I still remember some of the card tricks he taught me. But he was a very genial man, and he had a boy too about my age who lived down there. And the boy wasn't around very much. He must have been divorced, lived with his mother, but. And the Colson and Joneses, they were off and on, and I can remember seeing Joneses in town one day, and I knew that they were behind their telephone bill, and I told Dad I saw Mr. Jones down at the Oasis, and Dad went down there and collected the bill, you know, so he always looked out for the thing. And the other thing, though, you talk about what we did, Halloween tipped over the outhouses. That was a real project.
I'm sorry, we're still going.
Well, this is the Soap Lake grade school baseball team. Now, I don't know particularly why, but I'm always the one holding the balls and the bats. And I'm right here in front. And starting from the back row is Paul Hampton, Bruce Swaska, a guy named Vuckel, George Waltho's holding the dog, Leo Handley's on back. This is Les Morton. And this is Thompson, Del Scheib, and maybe this is Vuckel. I don't know. Oh, this is Weiss. This is the Weiss boy. And that was taken, I suppose I was in the 6th grade, 7th grade, something like that. And that was our baseball team. Now, actually, getting to the treatment, it's amazing that, of course, Soap Lake got started as being a health resort. And that's the reason the Siloam, the Lakeside, and all those hotels were built. And the people that I can remember the most had were the Berger's disease people. There were a number of people that in there, remember, it was not unusual to see fellas on crutches, a leg cut off, or we had a couple of guys that just run out and had on scooters on the platform. And Harvey Thompson, you know, he had a little car, he couldn't get around, and that's why Soap Lake got the reputation of being the only place where there was treatable for Berger's disease.
That was after World War I.
Berger's disease, and that was a circulatory disease of some sort that World War I veterans seemed to get. And through a grant from the federal government and the state, they built the McKay Hospital to treat primarily Berger's disease. And it wasn't unusual to see a lot of people, a lot of men in Soap Lake with legs cut off, arms and fingers, and like Billy Williamson, and all those people. That's the reason that Earl McKay came. He was a Scotchman, and he was he flew in the Esquadrille. He was a pilot in World War I. Earl was, and he's from Wilbur, but he came down from Soap Lake, and people, they like the mud baths. The mud baths, for some reason, the mud was better over on the West Beach, halfway between the West Beach and the News Colony. Somebody with a mud pile in there. And then we had people, they had a fellow named Gus Wallen, Gus Wallen, that's right. He had what we call deep sea baths, and he'd take his boat out to the upper end of the lake and somehow bail out water from the bottom of the lake. And he had a a big bin behind the place and stink the sulfur with the water. Oh, it was just horrible. But people would go in. He had the Soap Lake baths, and the Smiths had mud baths, and rheumatism and arthritis and skin diseases, eczema.
Using that before World War I too.
Oh yes,
Realize-
that's when it got started. Treating and the Indians.
Yeah.
The Indians recognized they'd treat their horses and whatnot in the water down here, and if they got skinned up or whatnot. And that's really how Soap Lake got started. That's how my uncle came to Soap Lake. It was, of course, for consumption, but any time for health problems. I've got literature that is almost like Snake Doctor. There must have been a list 2 paragraphs long of what would cure you. What it could be. Oh, yeah.
I got a copy of that.
Have you? Well, just and that was published in 1923, as best I can.
And I actually got an actual one from Marina that her mother had.
And I said, well, this was the original one that I made copies. I gave to Dorothy Downing, a copy of it. And,
Well, that's interesting that even way back then, they recognized the difference in the depth of the lake, because you remember
Yes.
they were doing research on, because of the temperatures, it doesn't mix, and there's those, I don't know, shrimp or brine shrimp that are unique to the Soap Lake, so they recognized that way back then, that if they got the mud or water from deep, it was different than on the surface.
And the other thing that I didn't mention, though, is the ethnic variety in Soap Lake during the summertime. There was quite a Jewish population, and they normally conveyed around the Lewis Hotel, but they're scattered around. We had Jewish people staying in our apartments, and then there were the Greeks, and they were most of like James Tavern and No Terraces. The James and Pappases, they were railroad people. They worked. Jimmy Arvin was the section hand before he opened the James Cafe. And the Greeks and the Finns, the Malins were Finnish people. They lived at. They had the hotel, the lakeside, halfway down the hill. The Finns, the Greeks. But anyway, you walk down the street in the evening and. In the summertime, and it seemed like the recreation would be, they would go one side from the street, walk down by the Walter Hotel, cross the street, come back up, and there was no sidewalk on the north side when you got past No Terraces. They'd cross and come up. But you could hear any different ethnic languages being spoken. It was, and a lot of people came over. It was most of them from the coast of Seattle, and the season started when the Seattle schools closed until after Labor Day, and then things just sort of like a blanket went over the town for the most part. But during the wintertime, I can remember we had quite a few people from Alaska. There was a guy coming there from Point Barrow, from Flat. And a lot of places, several places, not too many, but come down from Alaska. And the guy had some interesting stories about what went on at Point Barrow. He had a grocery store at Point Barrow. And he said the Eskimos come in and like to read the Sunday paper. It would be a month late by the time he got it, but they'd pour over the colored thing. And of course, he said, those poor people, the water, they never took baths. You could smell them a mile away.
What about 4th of July at Soap Lake?
Well, we always had a celebration. The ones that my dad remembered the most was that they set them off. They had a place out in the middle, not in the middle of the lake, out in the east beach. It's out in the water on a tower. And they got out there, and some guy they had all the fireworks there, and it went off, and they had to dive off. A guy got hurt. All the works went off at once. But we always had fireworks in Soap Lake on the 4th of July, come hell or high water. I mean, fireworks, and of course they were illegal at those days. You didn't have to have a license to shoot off displays. Everybody had their own skyrockets, and what you had to watch out for the firecrackers, you get some duds, and you'd sort of hold and get scissors. And sometimes those damn scissors, if you hold them, it'd go out the back end. And so you had to watch. But fireworks come 4th of July was a big show in Soap Lake.
Now, when you were,
It was about 1923. They had, I think that was the year that the around 23 or 24, the Siloam, the Thomas, the Lakeview, all went up. And those are the three, some of the three of the biggest hotels.
And then that was the same time that you said Frank was living, your Uncle Frank was living at the sanitarium?
Well, yeah, my Uncle Frank in 1923 went to Edgecliff Sanitarium, TB Sanitarium in Spokane. And
Because of the fire that burnt out, or?
well, he was living up at the asylum at the time, and from there I think he may have went to Spokane to Edgecliff because he was in bad health, and I suppose that's what happened to him.
Did you say that fire started because someone was burning weed?
Well, yeah, crazy. There was no excuse for that fire. They had a guy out there that was cleaning up the weeds in the fire, and he let, like the veranda, they had a veranda around and the fire, the weeds got under the veranda, the way it went. And they had a swimming pool there, but there wasn't sufficient water to, it got started with frame construction, and it just went up, nothing flat.
I have a question about the Rock House again. Your neighbors down the street, or maybe a street over, were the McGraths, and that's where the big tower family.
Oh, well, no, that was the Gillis.
Gillis?
Gillis owned it first. And Gillis, Mrs. Gillis, they were there as far as I know, and Willard, her son, was the manager or the operator for Fred Forsyth of the Pastime. The Gillis that sits back almost on the alley back, it sat back there, and that was, as far as I know, the Gillis's apartments. And they had a horseshoe type arrangement, and
And was that a water tower?
I think it was. There was a well there. It must have been. I don't remember how it operated, but that was probably a well. But I don't think they may have had a thing up there, but water storage. I don't remember. I remember it being there, but Linda, but I don't remember it being in use. And the Gillises are real good friends of the family, and I can't. I went away to school because my mother graduated from the Ephrata High School, the class of 22. And she rode the bus from Soap Lake to Ephrata and headed every mile of it. But she said that Charlie Sage was a bus school driver. They actually had a stove in the bus in the wintertime, an actual stove. They didn't have no heater, but had a stove. And the road they took generally came out of town, went up the Westmont Acres way, and then from Westmont Acres into an old road that wasn't paved or anything. And she hated it, and she said that any kid of hers, if she could afford it, was never going to go ride that bus. And never did.
So you went, so after 8th grade, you went to school
I went away to boarding school.
up at Sprague.
I went to St. Joseph Canvas Sprague my freshman year. There I couldn't stand, the nuns couldn't stand me and I couldn't stand them, and I transferred to Gonzaga Prep in Spokane.
Well, tell us just a little bit what it was like grade school in Soap Lake.
Oh, well, actually, the educational opportunities in Soap Lake were outstanding. We had a two-room school. There was a two-room, the 5th, 6th, and 7th, 8th grade, 4 grades on this side, and 1, 2, and 3 on the other side, and the bathrooms in the middle. And
whereabouts was the school located?
right where the city hall is now standing. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's the school.
That's just a two-room school?
Yeah. Well, this is the 1, 2, 3, 4 grades here, and the other side is exactly the same with 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, that's my school. And of course, there's nothing but gravel and rocks for a playground. And we had some swings and stuff over here, and they had 2 boilers, one in each room. And we liked it in the wintertime because they had the little metal shield around the stove, and you could throw your coats to dry out and warm up, and then throw them over that. And when they finally took them out and went to oil, we were just really disappointed. But the day would start. The first half hour, community singing. Mrs. Cuddyback played the piano, and we had a community. We had these everyday songbooks, and you could request anything you felt like playing, would sing along. So that was the first half hour, and then everything divided up, and it was sort of hard on the teachers in a sense because they had the 4 high grades. They were all in the same class, so there was a certain amount of carryover. You had certain subjects one grade would take, but you were always you were exposed to other classes. But I can remember studying ancient history. I knew who Socrates and Xanthippe were. We studied Shakespeare in grade school, and that was in the upper grades, 6th and 7th. And the University of Washington would come down to Wenatchee and put on a Shakespeare play, and we would study the play, and then we would go down and see it. They would provide transportation and private car, and we'd go down to Wenatchee and see it. Then we had musical productions twice a year, and we had a rhythm band. But then the other thing that was unique to Soap Lake was that we had Gregor Aganov, a Russian-trained classical violinist. He graduated from the Moscow Conservatory of Music. And he and his father escaped when the revolution came, and they went through China to Seattle. And I don't know why Louis came over to Soap Lake, maybe for health reasons. I think it was for health reasons, built the Lewis Hotel. He moved a hotel he freighted to Soap Lake and added on to it. And I can remember Mr. Aganov, they were very good friends of the family. And the people came in, like Louis, he'd come to the door, never knock, come out, and they were just part of the family, the way Soap Lake, the community was. But for nothing, Mr. Aganov organized our grade school orchestra. I took violin lessons from him for all the time I was in grade school until I was a sophomore in high school. But we had a band, orchestra. I don't know how many violins, trumpets, and cello, and 2 cellos, and we had a real education that I at least appreciated the classics and literature and the like, and current events. Well, I know where I was when Pearl Harbor was attacked. I was right know where I was standing on that Sunday morning, and on December the 7th. But it was amazing to me. Look, where's Pearl Harbor? Heck, I mean, I knew, we all knew where Pearl Harbor was, but we studied about the rape of Nanking and all of the Pompeii up to the Yangtze River and all that stuff, and the invasion of Poland. And knew all about that stuff, and we had a musical education, a history education, the classics.
It's amazing to me that you learned this in grade school, whereas there are a lot of college students now that are just learning this.
Well, the boy from Soap Lake that plays the violin, Soap Lake seemed to really have this figured out to pool their resources. Everybody that's got violin lessons from the guy that had the hotel, it was all interconnected.
Oh, yeah.
And the education he got during the summertime with, like you said, the cultural diversity of the town in the summertime, you got exposed to that. You heard these other languages being spoken when you're walking up and down.
Well, there was a cosmopolitan community.
Yes,
versus
you're right.
almost everything else being pure agricultural.
Yeah. Soap Lake was a poor school district. And the reason for that is that we had no industrial tax base. This was a real thorn in the side of the Soap Lake people. The Grand Orchards and that railroad was all part of the Ephrata School District, and they got all the railroad revenues, the railroad taxation. And so Soap Lake just had the property value, that was it. And so Soap Lake was a very poor, in a sense, financially with regard to the education system. They had the special levies, but the
Ephrata school line still goes out.
that's
railroad.
right, yes.
And it seems like they'd be a lot closer.
Oh, yeah,
The people out 20th would be a lot closer. To
Yeah, the
Soap
kids
Lake.
at Adrian and Grand Orchard all went to Ephrata.
That was purely for the tax
Yeah.
benefit.
And so I know that it was quite a rival. We were supposed to play in the grade school, play baseball, and we had the better team. We could beat Ephrata anytime. And my class and my group, the best athletes the Ephrata High School had came from Ephrata, from Soap Lake. It was really most unusual that the best athletes came
So
from.
Soap Lake was?
Basically,
Well, we didn't have a high school.
residents were playing against Salt Lake residents.
Yeah. Well, funny thing, we went up and played Coolidge City once, baseball. And it was supposed to be a grade school thing, and we were beating them, and they put in some ringers from the high school, and one thing led to another, and finally they got so many high school kids in that we said, the heck with it, we quit. And we left. Would you believe that the superintendent of the schools and Coolidge City gave us the finger? Oh yeah, we got a hard arm. We left, but they put on all the rings. We were playing the high school up there, and we decided the heck with it. We quit, but he gave us the finger when we left.
I didn't know they had the
Diplomacy
finger
at
back
its
then.
I didn't know they had that.
Oh,
I always wondered about, you would assume having rattlesnakes in the area and that periodically they must have shown up in town. And with the
no, Phil bull snakes, but I could take you to, even probably today, I could show you where I could find your rattlesnakes. Along the west side over there, and there's several dens over there, and they're probably still in existence. And I've been caught in the middle of them. I must have been either a sophomore or junior in high school, and we got a call. We didn't get a call, but we monitoring all the calls on the switchboard. There was a plane crash up on Westmont Acre area. It was a B-17 from the base. And Dad said, well, Junior, should we go up and take a look? And I said, yeah. Well, we got in the car and we wove up, and we had to come up and take the Westmont Road up there. And we got up there, and there were a number of trucks or cars stopped there. And Gordon Nix was a sheriff, and they had the ambulances and whatnot, and the plane you could see was burning down there. But there's a lot of dry washes up in there. And they couldn't figure out how they couldn't get the ambulance through there. And my dad volunteered as well, Junior hunts jackrabbits up there. He could probably show you how to get down there. And so he told the sheriff, and Nix told the ambulance driver. So, okay, I got on the lead ambulance on the running board, rolled the window down and hung on. And I showed him how to drive down, avoid the washes, and we had to circle around and get down there. And got to about, I suppose 150 feet from the burning plane, and I jumped off and started running towards the plane, and I must have ran 25, 50 feet, and I jumped over a dead airman. He was laying there just like this, and I jumped over two of them, and I can tell you that brought World War II to my wife really fast. There were no survivors. They were thrown out they were a few feet from the fuselage, but those poor guys were burnt, and they were just laying there like this. And I didn't see him, it was so dark, I didn't see him until right there, and I had to jump right over him and directed the ambulance there. So that brought home to me World War II better than anything that I can think of.
So when the Indians would come down earlier.
Well, yeah, the Indians would come down, and they come down in April when the Camas was moving. And they'd come down and dig Camas. They'd be down for a month to 6 weeks. Come down from the Colville from Nespelem. And they would come down in horses and wagons and pitch teepees. And the kids would come with them, the whole family. They would come down, and the squaws would go out, and there's places there where they could, one of my friends said they would pound the Camas bulbs and whatnot and make meal out of it. There's some places up on the rock behind there, and they were very friendly. We'd go over there and play with the Indian kids, and of course they liked to wrestle. They're good wrestlers, but it was funny. They got ready to leave, and they gave Alvin Finney a horse. And that horse was the darndest swayback thing I had ever seen. It had like a U-shaped back, and I'm sure that they gave it to him because it would never make the trip back to Nespelem. But Alvin was so proud of that horse. Oh man, and they farmed it out. I don't know whatever happened to the critter. Probably didn't live through the winter, but they gave him the horse, and then he was so proud of it. But it had a sway back; it wouldn't need a saddle. But
Came and stayed for 6 weeks, you said.
a month or so, yeah.
You
And
were
they-
telling us about the bone game.
Well, the bone games, they call them stick games. Have you ever seen them play it? Well, you know how they have there are 2 rows on each side, and they have the sticks out there, and you win, then they pass the bones back and forth, and the guy on the other side, they watch, and they're banging the drums and the yelling, the whooping, the hauling. Finally, they're ready to make a talk, and they try to point where it is. And if you guess right, you got a stick. And I think you got 5 sticks, you won the game. But there was tremendous betting on it. And they would have, maybe 5 to 10 people on a team on each side. And they'd watch like mad, try to figure out past the bones. And they were all the bones. They had 2 bones.
Kind of thing, right?
Yeah,
You had to pick the one with the mark on it.
yeah. And,
That's what they play.
The story about them not coming back to Salt Lake.
of course, I wasn't involved in it. I don't know. I think maybe they weren't too popular because they created quite a nuisance. And when they had the dedication of the health thing out there, I talked to the chief and I said, one of the reasons you come back, I'll bet, was because most of the bars had closed, had shut down. He looked at me, yeah, we were kidding each other, but the James Cafe and the Bob White, they're all closed, and there wasn't enough drinking spots for them. But I think that mainly because they probably weren't invited. And
What were the biggest, as city attorney, what were the biggest things going on in the city? In effect, you were.
well, the biggest thing of the really was actually, I think, was the acquisition of the West Beach. That was a real project. The acquisition, and I think they paid $10,000, and otherwise it was the same old thing, writing ordinances, or they'd have a squabble over the nudist colony.
What years was that nudist colony in operation?
Well, as far as I can remember, I can really remember it over there, and I can remember the guy, the chief guy over there, the beauty queen, was Freddie. And they would have it was crazy, and we go over there, and they would have a beauty contest. Who had the best tan? See, had the best tan, and he wore a blue ribbon around his waist.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was the thing with the war. Who had the best tan? I mean, that was.
So what year are we talking here?
Well, we're talking 1933 up to 40, 41, something like that. And they were.
Only men?
Yeah, only men. Oh boy, you could. But then halfway between Soap Lake and the was the women, and the women had their place, and they would build rock, shelters or something. They'd lay down there and get their tan. but I can tell you an experience. Leo Hanlon and I were riding our bikes and the road along parallel, and we were coming back from over there to the men's bedroom. We stopped, and here this gal stood up, and she was looking towards Soap Lake coming down the path. And we were over on the right side, and she didn't bother to look. And so she put on a show for us until we started laughing so hard. She looked and, boy, she ducked out behind faster than you. But the funniest thing, she was looking down the path, didn't know it was coming. She stood up and completely disrobed, and we just started laughing. And boy, she like a jack in the box. She came back into the shell quicker than you could. But there was no mixing. No, I mean, there was no, the men had their spot and the women had theirs. And
So was it a resident place?
no, Freddie lived there. They had a couple of shacks there. He lived there in the summertime. He took care, supposedly, that was his shack.
The nude beach, really.
Yeah, the big guy. He wore they had the best tan. That was he wore a blue ribbon. And Freddie generally got the blue ribbon.
Now, the road up the lake, it was put in,
Well, it was finished in 1934. That's when President Roosevelt came through, first time. My dad delivered a couple of times. He delivered a load of hay to some farmer or some cattleman on the north side of the lake, and he drove his truck across the lake. There was so much ice. He actually, otherwise you had to go up a high hill road. I don't know what road that would be. High hill up, over, down, around, and come down. Yeah. No, no. There was a road. You see, what was cut off was the dry coulee. You see, you could go up to Adco and you could go up, but Williams Lake was as far as you could you could go by Williams Lake, but it would circle around, and there was really no way to get into Soap Lake, the north end of Soap Lake, but over the High Hill Road, and it wound down past Fatty Price's place. And
so they were by East Beach that would run out. Were there many docks in the lake prior?
the only docks in the lake was a main one that ran out from the East Beach. It ran out so shallow, it ran out several hundred feet. There's old pictures of it coming out. And there really wasn't much of a dock of any kind on the West Beach. It sloped down with good swimming, but we had a diving board and there was a high dive. There must have been a 3 meter and a meter board on a raft that they'd anchor out on the West Beach. But there may be a little dock going out maybe 50 feet or so, but nothing, the ice would do away with it. In the wintertime, they just never, best they would have a couple of logs anchored to the shoreline.
What about winters on the lake? Talk about ice skating on Salt Lake. Did you do that as a child? or
Well,
not?
yes, my friend, we'd go ice skating if the ice was smooth enough, maybe down by the news column, because the fresh water would make the smoother ice. And when the lake would freeze over, it generally was too rough to ice skate on. But after the war, when we lived here, my wife and we went out and skated out on the lake, and it was good ice skating. For the ice was rather soft, and your blades.
As a child, because it was easy to.
Yeah, we
just put
skated.
it
It was
in.
rather, sometimes it was rough. When I was a kid, there were very few smooth places that freeze over, but the smooth places were down by the news colony where the freshwater springs was, and that would be fairly smooth to ice skate on.
You mean it was rough because it was like sudsy?
No, it wasn't sud. I don't know, Karen, why it's so rough. Maybe the wind blowing or something. But in later years after the war, the ice was much smoother, and my wife liked to skate on it because the ice was soft. Her blades could really sink into it.